All right, so we're gonna go ahead and move these out of the way, and I'm gonna show you how to do this. So your clay, you have a 5-pound piece. Remember, this first project is gonna be an open form, which means basically you can put something in it. Now, if you made a lid for it and set the lid on top of it, it would still be an open form. It would just be an open form with a lid. So your clay is a 5-pound piece. You want to take about 1/5 of it, and then from there, take some off of that because you're going to want to add things to your piece. I'm going to take about this much clay off of mine. I'm going to set it in the plastic bag in the container so that it doesn't dry out while I'm working on the other piece. All right, so as we said before, you always want to start by wedging your clay. So I'm going to take and just going to push and twist. Okay, so this clay is pretty good, ready to go. Now I'm going to work it into a kind of a lumpy ball shape by just tapping it on the tabletop. And remember, if your clay is too dry, you might want to squirt some water, or poke a hole, squirt some water into it, and work that water into it well. This clay is all ready to go. So I'm going to just tap it now with my hand. So I wedged it, kind of tapped it on the table to get it into a lumpy ball shape, and now I'm going to work it into a ball. As you're working, you'll notice that the clay on your hands, this is where it's still moist, it begins to dry very rapidly. Your hands heat up. So if that happens to you, just every now and then maybe squirt the surface of it just to keep the surface from drying out too much. So I'm just kind of working that shape of it. Now, it doesn't have to be a perfect ball, and this is very good for making a pinch pot here. There's kind of a little imperfection there, which is good. I'll use that spot to poke a hole in it so that imperfection will disappear. And so when you make the hole, you want to get it as centered as possible, and you want it about 1/2 inch from the bottom, okay? And I'm turning it to try to keep the hole centered as I go. All right, so I've got the hole in there. It goes like this now. This will be the top, this is the bottom, but I'm going to turn it upside down to work on it. So when you pinch, you always want to start pinching at the bottom portion of it, because as it gets larger, later on it may be difficult to reach the middle of the piece. So you just turn and pinch, and I'm just pinching like this. This hand right now is just supporting it and turning the piece. I will switch hands from time to time, and sometimes I'll use both hands. So there's no wrong or right way to do it. Just take your time. Keep in mind that it's not necessarily a fast journey, it's a slower journey, so try not to rush it. As you get better at this, you can do it very quickly. But if this is your first or even your 10th pinch pot, it's going to take you some time and practice. I have easily done way over 1,000 pinch pots, so I've had lots of practice. Now what I'm doing as I'm pinching now, I'm kind of just pushing on the rim a little bit too to kind of evenly disperse the clay throughout it. So some things I'm doing, I'm using both hands. As I'm pinching, as I get to an area that feels a little thicker, I'll pinch harder. And then if I get to an area that feels thin, I won't pinch as much. Now I'm getting a little crack here, so I just want to seal that up, make sure that doesn't get worse. All right. Now I'm just working on a simple bowl form. If you want to make a different form, you can push more on the bottom to try to elongate a little bit. You can kind of pinch together on the edges as you go to keep the edges from getting too wide too quickly. I said pinch, but kind of more push, compact the clay back together. All right, and then I want to talk to you about the 2 biggest mistakes that I see with student pinch pots. The first one is they make the rim really, really skinny. And a really skinny rim is going to want to chip and tear and crack. So don't do that. Leave that the even thickness with the rest of it. For example, you can see how these rims are the same thickness as the rest of the clay. This one, the whole piece is thin, so the rim is thinner. And another thing with pinch pots, you notice it's not perfect. When you throw a bowl on the wheel, you can make a pretty symmetrical shape. Let me grab a couple of examples to show you. All right, so first of all, here's a little flat bowl student made a few years ago, Bryce, and you notice how it's nice and symmetrical. The rim is real even. Here's a little vase that was made, and it's very symmetrical, very even. And then my little coffee cup that I drink out of, I just put my clay hands inside of it. Very symmetrical, and working on the wheel, you can do that. When you're working with pinch pots, generally, since they're handmade, you don't worry about symmetry and perfection so much. You can do things like tap them on the rim or try to even them up, but kind of embrace the fact that it's handmade and it's not going to be a perfectly symmetrical form as you work on it. or as you finish it as it's done. Okay, so what I'm doing now is I'm just kind of feeling for any thicker spots. You can make these very thin and they become very fragile and delicate. Being that you're probably going to bring these to school to have them fired, I wouldn't recommend making them super thin. But if you do make them really thin and that's just the thing that you want to do, that's okay with me. What you'll want to do then is you'll just want to be really, really cautious bringing it to school. Because generally when these get bone dry, they will break quite easily, like this slip that we made. Okay, so I'm just feeling for any big lumps, but you get the general idea. I want to show you a few ways that you can distort the shape. I'm going to just wet this down for a moment so it doesn't get too dry while I'm working on it. All right, so remember, as I said, when you squirt the clay, the water doesn't really go into it. It mainly stays on the surface, but I'm just making sure the rim stays nice and moist right now so that I don't have problems with that later on. I can sit down for this next part. I generally work standing up, but it's up to you. You find what's comfortable for you. So now I have a nice round form. I could easily change that to more of what would be an oval or a bathtub shape. Okay. If I want it to be a heart, I could leave that point there and I could take this end. And as long as your clay is plastic and flexible, you can do a lot of things to it. So there's a nice little heart shape for a bowl that I can make, and I could tap the bottom and flatten it out a little bit if I wanted. All right, so on this particular project, it's an open form, which means it should be open in some way. It should be decorated, and some different things you can do. You can stamp it, like this one here. You can carve into it, like this one here. You can add some type of a base on it, as these all have a base on them. You could add handles to them, and I think the examples I showed you, I had some of those different things, but I really want you to think through the process before you start of what it is that you're trying to achieve. You can modify it as you go, but the point is if you have a map, you're more likely to get there than if you just say, I'm gonna wing it when you go. All right, so I've got a nice little shape there. I'm actually gonna change mine a little bit more. I could actually make it square by flattening out the edges, but what I wanna do is I wanna do an undulation like this, more like a flower shape. And so I'm just kind of reworking it back around again. And then I'm going to push in. Actually, I'm gonna get the rim wet again, because remember, if you don't have a spray bottle, you can just have a little cup of water, dip your fingers in the water and use it that way. But I'm going to push in and with 2 fingers and out with 1, kind of change the shape. And I'm gonna go opposite corners to start with. Just keep in mind, if it starts cracking, you've got to really kind of rework that edge so it doesn't get worse. Now, what's going to do at first is it's going to make a little square by doing this, a little more square. And then I want to do the same thing in the in-between spots to give it more of that flower shape. So there's different stages of clay. The first one is greenware. We're working with greenware clay. So this is greenware. Bone dry clay is greenware. So basically, if your clay has not been fired, it's called greenware. If it's green, it means that it's fresh or new and it can be kind of remade back into soft clay again. So I have a nice little flower shape. I would work on the shape a little bit more, but you get the idea. So we have greenware, which is plastic, leather hard, and bone dry. And then we have bisqueware. Once we fire this, we get bisqueware. And I will get an example to show you of bisqueware. These are small, but they're little flower shapes. Okay, so these were pinched into shape. And then once it's bisqueware, you can glaze it or finish it, and this is glazeware when it's all done. So those are the 3 stages. We have greenware, bone dry, and, or sorry, 4 actually. Greenware, bone dry, bisqueware, and glazeware. All right, so I have my nice little shape. What I would do now is, if I'm not going to work on this for a while, I could, if I'm going to work on the other part and add things to it, I could just set it upside down, out of the way. I could leave it right side up, out of the way. This would be a good point to stamp it if I want. Now, when you stamp your clay, if you do that, you don't want it real wet. The inside's pretty wet still, so I would let that firm up a little bit. I could stamp the outside now. And if you do stamp your clay, it will distort it a little bit while you're doing that. I'm going to grab a stamp to show you. All right, so I think what I'm going to do is just do 1 stamp in the middle right now, just to show you, because I'm not stamping this piece, but you support it from the back side, take your stamp, and this is a ceramic stamp that I made. It's a little flower. It's not coming out super good. There you go. They can see that better. All right. But you could take something like a 4 candle, and I'm just going to experiment with a few different things, and you could do some designs like this all the way around. Okay. But you can make anything into a stamp. Here's one of the clay tools. If I use that, I could do a design like this on the piece. I could go over the whole thing if I wanted. All right. Anyways, you get the idea. I'll work on the shape of this more in a little bit, but that's how you make your pinch pot, and then you set it aside to add all the other components on. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the video here, and in the next video I will show you how to add things to your pinch pot.